Okie dokie, guys. So, pretty amazing day today. We had an 8.7 earthquake that took place effectively in Russia on the border in between the Kamchatka Peninsula. Well, if you played Risk, that's the part that almost touches Alaska. And these dates are not precise, so don't hang me on a piñata. But basically, what you'd be looking at is if you go back to about June the 20th, it kind of goes 7.3 Alaska, 6.1 subantarctic, 7.3 Alaska about the 17th of July, 6.7 Macquarie Island, with again just after that was a earthquake in Vanuatu, because that kind of plate kind of curves around into that area. Then basically we go back to being a high, I think it was about 7.6 in Alaska, basically been bouncing backwards and forwards. So now the 30th, we've had an 8.9 quake. Now, also at the same time, interesting because let's break down the statistics. 8-point earthquakes occur about once a decade. So far, that statistic's nothing there. We have around about 7 plus earthquakes that take place a year around the world. We're now up to actually 8. So we're in July, and we are now exceeding the normal average anyway. At the same time, you'll have sort of what they call bolides or fireballs that will take place all around the world. About 8 of those a year. Well, we've had 4 this month, and 2 of them have been in Canada, Alaska, pretty much up towards the Canadian-Alaskan border, northeast, and then 2 have been down by basically Florida, near the former base of the High Altitude Atmospheric Research Facility near Puerto Rico there. And again, we all know what happens in Alaska. Same time, basically, the quake took place. I can't even know how to pronounce it, but this is actually a major military base. It's got aviation and a naval fleet there, and it's just brought up a lot of this. Remember that big drone attack? Well, a lot of those bombers have been moved away from that point, and they've actually just been moved up to that location there. And this comes about middle of July, about a week ago. State television turned around and said that Russia has this weapon called Poseidon that can effectively trigger off tsunamis all around the world. Well, it can trigger off tsunamis which are laced with radiation, and so pretty much 2 weeks after that, bang, this particular event takes place, 8.7. On the other side of the Earth, what we now have is we've got Operation Sabre Talisman. I always want to say Sabre Tiger, but Sabre Talisman taking place in Australia, goes all the way to August the 4th. Two carrier groups there, 35,000 troops, and effectively a lot of what they're dealing with is logistics and air support for big operations, but amongst all of that is the launching of space warfare operations. In fact, today Australia launched its first rocket, and it kind of fell over and went katum. But probably about in fact today, 2 rockets went up. I don't know the exact launch date, but one went up for a asymmetrical radar system, which was launched to basically protect, get this, at 8:10, 4 hours before the Alaskan Russian earthquake went up, and basically this thing was launched to predict volcanoes, earthquakes, tsunamis. And it's part of this sort of series of these, effectively what you would call Hotel Alpha Alpha Romeo pilot. We'll say pilot. That's not actually of God. But anyway, they've launched that. That's kind of that version for space, and that's gone up, and this job was to protect earthquakes, and this is what's occurring. At the same time, all of this week we have been launching new spaces. Apparently there's a Russian satellite very interested in what we've actually launched. We've just signed a whole bunch of agreements, basically creating new legislation for space bases in New Zealand. But I want to flick you back to 2022, when we signed a memorandum of understanding with the United States of America, basically about their coming to our aid with satellites and space-based technology. In the event we had a natural disaster here, which they'd also been training for in Wanganui around about middle of the year. But I think it was March, that particular exercise. But this memorandum basically says that if anything happens, and they have to, effectively what it does is we are handing air control over to the US military. While that's happening, at the same time this week, we also passed legislation which now means that Starlink in New Zealand can be used for military purposes. This has all happened this week. So hopefully nothing happens at all, but I am a little bit concerned. Again, right now, we're expecting the tsunami warnings are coming sort of about sometime tonight. Not, won't really be big of that deal other than the surge, but if it coincides with rising tides and suddenly we have some, a flood event, I mean, that would be the worst case scenario. You've got, a perfect storm. But yeah, no, just hopefully this week we go through all this week and no big dramas occur. But it said, it's I have been following this fact that's been ping ponging backwards and forwards. And again, one of the things I also say, which I talk about, one of the things when I've studied the system of how you can cause an earthquake. One of the methods is you create basically an arc bridge and you effectively transmit between Superdan. And again, it's quite interesting. My research that I've put this out years ago has now been, puts out there, but nobody's actually acknowledged who actually, first realised that Superdan and HARP actually work together. But they created an arc bridge, and these things called total electric content, TECs. So what they do is they zoom backwards and forwards, and eventually what they do is they displace the TECs into the rival hemisphere, and that will kind of expose itself in the form of bolide lightning or mass lightning strikes, which if targeted into a seismically active area, because again, the thing about what a lot of people who are skeptics about HARP don't get is they seem to think that HARP itself is the weapon. It's not. It's just the key in the ignition. What's actually really important is what goes on in the upper atmosphere, and effectively that a lot of that time is actually fed by what's happening with cosmic weather. So if you have a big solar storm taking place, that's an ideal time to roll out the material. And again, what we understand from HARP is this, no, it can't affect the weather. That's also, I mean, we get told that we say it's fake news if it can, but the reality is you can actually, you can effectively heat streams on the ionosphere which can be used to steer weather. And this is actually one of the methods that now when we look about geoengineering, again, the whole issue about geoengineering is that we've gone from you can't do that to all the things that we're told you can't do are now happening. And what's more, they're happening pretty much all how we were explaining the science. And I say we, all the people have been, following this issue for quite some time and not, what happens is the journalists will go and they'll talk to geologists who know nothing about astrophysics, so they're the wrong experts to be talking to begin with. Or they'll go and talk to the companies in question, and the company says, oh, we're not doing anything, and therefore that becomes the end of their investigation. The idea of actually hunting down multiple sources that are independent and verifying them doesn't really seem to be in the modern mass communications vocabulary, and yet they want to talk on, it's galling when you are actually following through on all the standards, getting multiple information to verify, doing this all the time, and then you're looking at people that really don't probably do a lot of reading in their own personal time anyway, and they're going home and printing off things off the internet and then going and then that's they're being hypocrites. So that's where we're at. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what actually happens in the next, I would say, next 72 hours to yeah, I'm going to go 72 to 3 to 4 days is basically what we're looking at. Because I said, each time we're seeing these things ping backwards and forwards, and it just sort of like acts like a rubber band, winds it up, and then you actually release it. Assuming, of course, at 8.9, the great scenario, the best case scenario is that actually was the release, and the target was the Russian. Of course, backtrack. Earthquakes do happen naturally. This could be a natural earthquake, but. And, I have about 15 little indicators that I normally going to follow to kind of like, makes me want to, decide whether or not it lean. Because this is not proof. This is causative. This is like, well, 100 people smoke cigarettes and 99 got cancer. Well, we can't say that tobacco causes cancer, but we can say that there seems to be a connection. And this is kind of how I've gone about things. I've looked for about 15 different, red flags that I look at. The higher they are, the more probable. So in this case, we've got strange cosmic weather occurring. We've got deployment of military exercises. We've got the target or the event where this occurs happens to be significantly geopolitical. We've got things happening in terms of the legislative and political arena, which are all occurring. We also have in Berlin Flats, because going back about a month ago, when we started looking at, again, a lot of stuff that was launching out of Rocket Lab, some very interesting stuff there. They've got two bases, in case you don't know, one in Wallops and one here in New Zealand. Look at the mission patch, some very interesting stuff actually happening there. And that was actually happening when they were launching stuff. There was lots of activity over Berlin Flats, including these, what they call these, big long sort of fish, which are sort of recognised as the harbinger of doom, because what happens is vibrations occur on the ocean, and then these type of fish come from up the deep. What we haven't got is really any mass whale strandings, which has always been one of my big strong indicators yet. But as these activities were happening in Berlin Flats, what were happening was that we were also having some very interesting guests over our skies to connect into the Five Eyes. Very, very, like things like equivalent of the Air Force 2 was actually up there. I got that on the flight tracker, screenshot that, so that's all verifiable. But we also had all these boats that were actually right off the coast of Dunedin in this area, which, I've been tracking that since the 2004 earthquakes, these, big sonic booms. And again, haven't really seen any reports of sonic booms. So we've got some bolide activity, should be 80 a year. We get four in a month occurring at specific places over Pacific Antenna Array. So I would say out of my 15, I probably, without being pedantic, I probably got about 6 or 7. And again, the fact that these quakes are getting bigger and bigger, and that's probably pushes up to 7 or 8. But it's not all the lights on the dashboard are lit up. But it's just we are in a very interesting geopolitical time. There is incredibly interesting technology being, they call it disruptive technology. And again, mainstream media is very good at dismissing stuff, but the reality is when we look at the speed at which things like again, one of the things about they say, the HARP doesn't have enough power to do things. Well, that's correct, but once you raise those antennas up into space, you start working with effectively space HARP, you actually even increase the power even further and you extend the range. So it used to be things could only really happen around kind of Alaska and about 2 or 3 locations in the world. Now these things just actually act as the relay station, and there's other material out there that kind of it actually one steers it left and right, one works up and down with the at what level where the signal's been translated to a certain point in the ionosphere, which is to create this catalytic event. And again, we've just seen sort of big Sprite blue activity again, all happening in this sort of in the case of Mexico, but again, very, very close on the map to where previous HARP sites were. And these are significant sites because they're picked because of their propagation qualities. So, yeah, not fully all the lights lighting up, but enough to kind of go, I thought I'd do a little video and say, hey, this is kind of some interesting stuff afoot politically. And that's what all I'm trying to say is, I'm not saying it is causing earthquakes, but it made me go and look and say, well, what was the military assets there? What is actually happening in the space environment? And it turns out there's a lot of really big stuff actually happening, and that's probably what concerns me. And as I said, from the New Zealand viewpoint, if we do have a natural disaster and it suddenly requires our allies, our Five Eye allies, to step in and use their satellites and their, then effectively what we're doing under this memorandum is letting them operate in our space, not under New Zealand law, but under US law. And again, I would argue that is actually these memorandums are actually, they're against Westminster law, because one of the things about Westminster law is the Bill of Rights 1688, which effectively says that no agent outside of the Crown can have any authority above the courts. And the idea that politicians go around empowering themselves by signing treaties on behalf of the rest of New Zealand without court, without it being, meeting the judicial requirements, that's a no-no. But it does seem to be a very common thing that's happening all the time now. And so, anyway, in the meantime, be safe. May the force be with you, as Yoda would say. And, Try to keep yourself grounded and not, it's to be aware and prepared, not to be in fear and scared. Make sure at these times you have, you've got exit strategies, your vehicles have got gas in them, you've got a spare bit of money, your first aid kit's up to date, you know where your neighbours are, you've all got a strategy in place so that you can, in the event that you're isolated or whatever, you can work together. And so it's just really about empowering each other. And unfortunately, what I'm seeing more and more happen, and I even had not a very pleasant experience today, is that we are being encouraged to be afraid of each other, and the idea of actually coming together to work communities and actually having faith in our own judgment, that's the bit I feel like we're being kind of made prisoners in our own land. And anybody that actually suggests that, no, you can think independently and you can question authority, is now becoming, we're becoming an enemy of the state. And we always were, but now it's becoming pretty hard-boiled.